Protesters rally in Australian cities opposing vaccine mandates. Thousands of protesters have converged upon Sydney and Melbourne CBD to demonstrate against vaccine mandates, including Victoria's new pandemic laws introduced by the government. Protesters gathered at Parliament House on Spring Street in Melbourne about 12 p.m. before rallying down Bourke Street chanting "Free Victoria." Crowds were carrying flags and banners, some of which read "Reclaim the Line" and "Together we can stop vaccine passports." The protests are part of a national day of action across the country. The protesters came to a stop at the Royal Exhibition Building, singing and playing music at the Carlton Gardens. Protesters chanted, "What do we want? Freedom. When do we want it? Now." One protester said the protests weren't about being an anti-vaxxer. It comes as Premier Daniel Andrews made the state's first pandemic declaration under the new laws on Friday. The Premier confirmed the pandemic declaration would come into effect on December 15 at 11:59 p.m. when the state emergency expires. In Sydney, protesters packed out Hyde Park in an active demonstration against vaccine mandates for a range of industries including entertainment, creative arts and healthcare. The protests are part of a national day of action today across the country, with demonstrations also planned to take place in Queensland, Perth, Canberra, Adelaide, and Hobart. Freedom protesters in Melbourne have had water thrown on them during a planned rally that has caused another day of disruption for the city's streets. Thousands of freedom protesters hit the streets of Australian cities on Sunday to protest vaccine mandates, COVID restrictions and pandemic legislation. Following several weeks of consistent protests in Melbourne, locals finally cracked, with some onlookers screaming at protesters marching and people in high-rise apartments were reportedly seen pouring water on demonstrators. "Why are you even protesting?" one member of the public asked the group. "Those poor kids should be at the beach with friends, having a great time on this gorgeous Melbourne day. Instead they are dragged to a protest probably wondering why and what it's all about." Protesters gathered at Parliament House just after midday, marching to Carlton Gardens and chanting, "Free Victoria, sack Dan Andrews and my body, my choice." Some Victorians took to Twitter to condemn the protesters, who they accused of damaging CBD businesses and causing trouble. Thousands of people gather in cities across Australia to protest against vaccine mandates, with one rally holding a minute's silence for anti-vaxxers who lost their job. Thousands have gathered in cities across Australia to protest against mandatory vaccinations. Dozens of demonstrators took to the streets in Sydney and Melbourne on Sunday to protest the introduction of vaccine mandates across several industries. Sydney's Hyde Park was flooded with protesters that brandished colourful flags and posters that read, "You can say no and no vaccine passport." In Melbourne, thousands congregated outside Parliament House on Spring Street before marching down Bourke Street and chanting "Free Victoria."